Cricket boards actually make watching their games almost impossible now. I spend almost as much time trying to find where I can view it as I do actually following the action. That is why I use NordVPN. They let me find all the cricket I want to watch while protecting me from the nasty side of the internet. Nord will free your cricket matches. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/good areas to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months on top. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Watch every match with NordVPN. Good Areas Live here, Jarrod Kimber. Remember, if you want to support us or ask questions, I suppose, on Wagon Wheel, which is what this podcast is, the best way of doing it is, if you're watching live, is to add a super chat. But if you're like, I don't know when Jarrod's going to be live, and I don't know, I was planning to do this Wednesday, and I was like, I could probably do it today. You can always do it via Patreon, which is what Karen has done here. So if you go to Good Areas Patreon, you can support us over there. He says, I found it heartwarming to see a Pakistani hand a test debut to a nearly 39-year-old Asif Afridi against South Africa recently. Perhaps a reminder that sometimes this game tells stories beyond the numbers. Have there been any other significant or memorable late-age test debuts like this in cricket's history? I mean, there's been lots of them. You know, I was lucky enough to be friends with a couple of guys who I think just, I don't want to say they didn't believe they could play test cricket, because that's the wrong way of putting it. But I think if they're both quite intelligent people, and if they'd sat down and thought about it, they were like, I'm not going to play for Australia. And that's Ed Cowan and Bryce McGain. Ed Cowan had decided to retire after the first class season that he was playing in. He wasn't particularly close to the Australian team. I can't remember, was it at Chris Rogers? No, it was before. They hadn't picked Chris Rogers at that point. Is that right? Yeah, and so Warner needed a batting partner. Warner was still fairly new to the side, I think, as well. And Ed Cowan got on one of the great form surges of all time at the right time. Got into the Australian team. And, having been around that, like the general disbelief, I think at times he knew a lot of New South Wales guys. So I don't want to say he felt like a tourist, but I think him and Chris Rogers, even after this, has said similar things before. There's an element of like, how am I in this situation? So those are two that come to mind. Because I think Chris Rogers played when he was a little bit younger, of course, but certainly didn't think he was going to come back. But the famous one, especially in Australian cricket, is Bryce McGain, right? 36 years old, at the age of 28, 29, still playing second 11 cricket quite a lot in district cricket in Melbourne. So not particularly close to being selected by Victoria. Gets a couple of goes from Victoria. It doesn't really work. It disappears. And then at the age of 36, again, goes on probably the age of 35, goes on a great form run. He's clearly the best spinner in the country by a distance. Then, because he's an amateur, he's not used to bowling that much and hurts his shoulder. And it never really recovers, I think, is fair to say. But Australia still pick him because they have no one else. So, and that one ends up in a very different kind of story, but certainly one of the more interesting debuts we've ever seen. So yeah, you do see these players picked late in life, and sort of in a lot of ways, I remember with Ed Cowan, Virginia, his wife, was a TV presenter in Sydney. She falls in love with this, goofy guy. That's my words. Ed probably wouldn't be happy with that. But, and gets dragged off to Tasmania. His dad used to throw the ball to him until he basically had no shoulder left. And then Ed Cowan gets to play for Australia. And in some ways, it's almost for everyone else as much as it is for them. In Bryce McGain's case, his son would probably be, one who would have grown up watching his dad not being sure what was going on, and then suddenly his dad goes on to play for Australia. Like, sometimes it's that side of things. It's the people who are involved with it that almost get as much, if not more. So yeah, I think it's, cricket's had lots of those sorts of players who've just been picked from nowhere, who've suddenly then maybe only played 1 or 2 games and disappeared, or go on to have, handy careers. Like Colin Miller, I'm picking 3 Australians here, is absolutely another one where you just like, there's no way that Colin Miller thought he was going to play for Australia, right? He was a medium pacer. He'd gone down to Tasmania to continue his professional career. In those days, you didn't really go to Tasmania to try and make it to the Australian side. And yeah, Colin Miller ends up. And so you see these players who very late career. Mike Yardy is one of my favorite ones, right? Yeah, Mike Yardy's a batter his whole career. And then and in T20 cricket, he basically comes up with this method where you can't hit him very easily. And he ends up playing in World Cups and winning World Cups. And, all sorts of things happen to Mike Yardy late in his career. So, that is a lot of it is stories. I always say to the team, like, we deal a lot in stats and analysis and technique and all these sorts of things, but we're storytellers, right? And sometimes the best story wins. And there's been some incredible ones, I think, throughout the history of cricket. Josh says, does it seem wild to you that 43 different pace bowlers have managed to take 200 test wickets whilst opening the bowling, but only 3 pace bowlers have taken 200 test wickets first change or later? Callis, Wagner, and Stokes, and 2 of those are all-rounders as well. No, it's not wild to me, Josh, because I've been saying it for ages that the way that we select seam bowlers is wrong, and I think the first change bowlers we should understand that they are going to have much worse figures than new ball bowlers, but I don't think we factor that in for selection. You've got Joel Garner, Neil Wagner, Pat Cummins. I'm trying to think if there's another one. Those are the 3 off the top of my head. Jasper Bumrah should be another one, but he gets the new ball. Where, you're in a situation where those guys have been so exceptional in different ways. In Garner and Cummins' case, it's just that we knew they were new ball bowlers and they also had skills that worked at first change, so they could do that. And in Wagner's case, it was almost reinventing the game. So I think it tells you how hard it is. I think Morne Morker's got a lot as well, right? There might be a couple of South Africans with a decent amount. I know Callis is certainly one, and Teeny might be another one. I'm not sure how much he used the new ball, but I think there's one other South African one as well. But yeah, generally, and then if you're really good as a first change bowler, you're more likely to get the new ball. I think we had this conversation with Varun on a podcast the other day where, or I had it with him off air, but it was a similar kind of thing of, if you go back and you look at Jason Gillespie and you look at Brett Lee, I think you can make a pretty solid case that Jason Gillespie would have been almost as good at first change as he was with the new ball. And Brett Lee would have been a lot better with the new ball than he was at first change. He's a swing bowler who had to wait for 2 of the best bowlers in the world, or sometimes number 1 and 2 in the world, right? In order for him to actually come on and bowl. And so they're going to bowl 5, 6, 7 over spells. And so Brett Lee's already behind the curve as a swing bowler. So I think that there have been lots of situations like that. I wonder if the next big step really is that we start to understand that. I think cricket's been quite good if you look at England, right, at going, we can't just have new ball dependent bowlers, right? And England have been quite good over the last 15 or 20 years at that. And Neil Wagner's probably moved New Zealand forward a little bit. And they were 2 countries that really, really struggled with that. And you see that lots even now. You see a bowler get picked and you're like, well, he's good with a new ball. What's it going to do at the 20 over mark, right? So that does happen quite a bit. But I think cricket's getting a little bit smarter now and looking for those patterns better. Alex says, I really enjoyed polite inquiries that you did with George Nobel for Cricket Info. What was the circling your hands in front of your face about? Could you see yourself working with George again on a podcast or something similar? We both work for the Cricketer now, so it's kind of ridiculous that the Cricketer haven't just got us back together. I write a monthly column for them. Obviously, George works for them on a daily basis. But yeah, I think it's been mentioned. I don't know what the full situation is. I offered to do podcasts for the Cricketer. It hasn't really come through. They've got their own reasons for thinking about things. And also they were in flux, I think, for a while. They were looking at being sold and all sorts of things. George, have talked about it. I've invited him on Red Inker a couple of times, by the way. He just hasn't come on. Classic George. The hand gesture is, I love George. We would obviously work together. There's no issue there. The hand gesture was from years ago. We were at the Cricket Info offices and we needed to go to the Oval. And Sambit Bal was with us, the editor, and he didn't have his pass. And George said, we don't need a pass. I'll get you in with my face. And then when he went up, there's a guy that we both know who's worked at the Oval for, certainly throughout my entire career. Anyone in media knows who this guy is. And so George sort of looked at him and pointed at his face like this and then brought Sambit through. And that's George's way of going, I'm so famous I can walk through. Whereas it was about 4 o'clock and I'm not even sure you needed to buy tickets at that stage. I think maybe the gates were just open. But that's where it came from. And I think when you're coming up with shows like that, you're just looking for things that kind of work and make sense more than anything else and I think there's something about the point point at face in circles that just kind of said a lot about our show without saying it. Like, I watch a lot of newer shows when they come through, when they're like, especially when major media companies are involved, and they try and force these big intros in and everything. And you're like, do people need that? What they really just need to understand is something a little bit more simple. If you go back to the scoreboard, right? You know, I used to start every show with Morning Everyone, right? Which is just a, you know, homage to Richie. But it allowed me to sort of start the show in a way that, like, with an inside cricket joke. And I think that's what Polite Inquiries was as well, with the facing of, like, there was just, it was a bit of an inside joke. Not everyone even knew what it meant, but it was quite clear that the show was going to be different to everything else. That show was lightning in a bottle. And, you know, there was a couple of spin-offs that worked quite well, as well. But you know, that was a show developed for me and George based on our talents. And too often in the media, that's not what people do. It's like, this works, so you have to do this. And I remember we'd had some terrible shows at Cricket Info that I had produced because I kept being told, you have to do this, or these people are doing this, why don't you try this? And I just kept trying these random shows until one hit. And I have no idea how many views Polite Inquiries has had, but it's probably like 500 million to 1 billion views over a long period of time with lots of different hosts and everything else. And we got Raul Drover to point his face in circle, and Ian Bell, and I don't know who else do we had Trotty on? We probably had other people I can't even remember. Mob says, how does Zach Fawkes generate so much powerful in swing? And if it's such a cheat code, why doesn't everyone simply do it? It's easily my most reliable movement to bowl, but obviously not at that speed. So traditionally, in-swing bowlers haven't been very successful at Test cricket. I think if you look at it, you've obviously, I mean, Mike Proctor didn't play a lot of Test cricket, but Mike Proctor is a very good example of someone. But if you go through Test cricket, it hasn't been the case that that's worked. And I think one of the reasons is it's very hard to get LBWs in Test cricket, right? So, you know, and I'm talking traditionally as a seamer. Everything was seen to be going past the leg stump. And now we understand things a lot more, that an in-swing bowler now makes a lot more sense. I would say at the moment, when the wobble ball seams back in, it's more dangerous than when it seams away. Because that can be a play and miss. Whereas if it's seaming back in, half the time it's hitting the stumps or a chance of an LBW. So I think we're starting to get that. But a lot of that is coming from the fact that umpires are more willing to give LBWs based on the ball hitting leg stump. It's an action that is, I've said this before, that if you look at the sort of biomechanics of men versus women, it seems to me that more women with their actions are more predisposed to bowl in swing, and that's probably something to do with being a bit more front on, and something to do with the hips. I guess I'm just guessing biomechanically there. Whereas men, I think, if you look at traditionally, certainly have been in that sort of other action of probably bowling a little bit more side on, and, you know, bringing the arm a little bit lower than women. You know, maybe women bowl with a higher arm action because they're short, right? And they need as much height as possible, whereas men don't need that as much. I don't know if that's part of it. But yeah, really good in swing. I think, you know, Mike Proctor used to bowl in swing right around the wicket. We've seen Megan Shoot do that. I think Shika Pandey might have done that. Certainly there was another bowler who did it. If you can bowl in swing over the wicket from close to the stumps, but moving the ball away out of the eye line and then bring it back in, like, I don't think biomechanically that many people have tried that before. Or if you can do what Proctor did and bowl in swing from around the wicket. I faced a guy who did that once. You know, obviously not even fast. And I was like, this is impossible. Like, every sort of movement I had was really, really changed. And it makes you start batting, consciously rather than subconsciously. So yeah, I think we might see more in-swing bowlers come through. Hurt says, impressed with your answer to the UFC style fight cricket question. I don't think anyone was. But the IPL now wants you to play in an NFL combine style event for uncapped players ahead of this. So I tried to be involved with something like this, which was the combine that the Major League Cricket had. And we had a contract with Major League Cricket to help them out with some data with intelligent cricket as well. And unfortunately, they kind of did the combine on their own. Whereas I was like, if this is done properly, we can turn this into anything, right? Like, it would have been incredible. So I think you're looking at things. Like, obviously throwing speed is really important. Running between the wicket speed is another one that I would really want to have a look at. The amount of revolutions. I think these are the sorts of things I told Major League Cricket at the time. Revolutions on the ball, drop on the ball, drift if you're a spinner. Yeah, all those sorts of things are very important. We were also trying to work out if there was a way of mapping the sort of fielding reactions, uh, and work out if there was a way around that as well. But yeah, I think those are, and then you've got, you want to be able to test speed off the bat, length of hitting, all these sorts of things. But I have a list of them somewhere. Ari says, have we now seen an increase of fast bowlers who bowl from beyond the perpendicular in recent years? It seems to me there is 8 to 10 bowlers in the world who have that action at the moment, or similar. So much cricket being played that we're always more likely to notice these bowls more. No, I think it's a big change, Reese. I think it comes from the wobble ball specifically, and the LBWs and DRS and the way that umpiring is done. So traditionally, if you bowled from over the perpendicular, so Scott Boland does it, Jasper Bomber does it, does Potts do it? No, Josh Tongue is another one who does it. There's a few guys, right? Traditionally, if you did that, the ball's angling down the leg side and the umpires are just giving them all not out, right? That doesn't happen anymore. So that follows into the in-swing question from before of, it's a bit like the in-swing in that you get into a position where where now if you miss that ball coming back in, you're a big chance of being LBW or bowled. LBW, I should say. And so you can't just put your pads in front of it like you would have in the past. So yeah, it's definitely something. I think if you look at the Scott Boland video I did maybe during the World Test Championship a couple of years ago, you'll see what I'm talking about in there. But yeah, it's something that we've definitely seen a lot more of. Traditionally, those was not seen as a good technique, right? And now, because the law changes and the delivery that is bowled, all these things have changed. I think things are very different. Reese says, should teams, nations go the complete opposite directions of Johan Bota's ideas and support the players better when they're injured, given how much Australia have got back from investing in Cummins? Or was he just a special case that they got right? So I think there's two Johan Bota questions in here. So I didn't see the comments. I just saw someone asked the question. And so I think what Johan Bota said, where are we? I think what he said was that injured players should not be paid. I'm just going through the headlines. If you play a game and you miss the next 5 games and you're out of selection, you get paid all the way. I'm not sure pushing players to play. I'm not sure that's pushing players to play when it gets a bit tough and hard. Learn to play through a bit of discomfort. Look, it's really interesting coming from a player from Johan Bota because I see him as one of the first truly professional cricketers. And I have no doubt that he might have a higher pain threshold than everyone else. He's also a spinner who batted a little bit and fielded a little bit. He's not a big thumping fast bowler coming in. This would be the worst thing that any cricket board could do. This is fundamentally one of the worst takes I've ever seen in professional sport. Because essentially what you were doing then is you are, and I know team owners who've said this, I know fans who've said this before, but what you do is you put yourself in a situation, right, where the players are not protected. And so they have to play through mild injuries, which means they could injure themselves a lot more. Separate to that, if you're not paying them when they're injured and they've been injured doing a job for you, there's legal ramifications. It doesn't even make sense from a legal perspective. And thirdly, there are only ever at best 50 players to pick from, but probably 30 players to pick from, and at worst 8 players to pick from for your national team, right? If you get to a situation where you have an incredibly talented player like Pat Cummins, as Reese says here, and you don't do everything you can to support them and make sure that they play, and you rush them back from injury and say, you just got to toughen up, and you lose them forever. There isn't another Pat Cummins, right? There might be another Jackson Bird, right? There might be, I was going to say another Bhuvi Kumar, but that's not even fair. There might be another Praveen Kumar, right? But there isn't another Pat Cummins. And so you are literally just losing that talent because you want them to harden up. No, you should be trying to do whatever you can. I think was it Joel Embiid in the NBA spent 2 or 3 years not playing all that much, and then he's never going to be on the court for 40 minutes a game regularly, right? He doesn't have that body. But for 30 minutes a game, they can probably get him back for 60 games a year, hopefully over the next couple of years. And certainly during his peak, that's what they got. And he was way better than having another player on the court for 40 minutes at times, right? That year he actually won the MVP, but I think he was better in another year where he was just a beast. Now, it was always destined not to last, and we see that sometimes with players. Sometimes players just don't have the physical capabilities to keep up in professional cricket. It's a lot of stuff out there. But if you're not looking after that high-end talent, and then if you're not paying people, like, it's such a bizarre way of looking at things. Like, if you hurt yourself at work, your work should be making sure that you get fit. That doesn't matter what the situation is. So I don't get it. There's some old heads who obviously think about these things differently, and I think the players are pampered, and obviously Johan Botha is one of them, but it's not for me. If you've got to support the talent pool, and you got to make sure that you have a duty of care. Like bringing them back, whatever, is just terrible. I mean, there's so many bad takes with those comments, and I can see. I think, as I said, we had 2 questions about them. I can see why people are upset about them. It just doesn't really make sense. We'll be back after this.
Ross Taylor couldn't see at night or when the clouds were in. Eventually, he had to see an eye specialist who would fix his eyesight. In the 2 years before the change, he still averaged more than 50 in international cricket. The top level of batting talent can basically see in the dark. That is who we are talking about in our new book, The Art of Batting. Head over and order your copy today. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now.
Rob says, South Africa sent a D team to New Zealand and lost 2-0, but somewhat held their own in the second test. Which letter team in India would be part of the current West Indies team in tests? It's a tricky one because it depends where the test is being played, because West Indies bowling is pretty strong, right? Like, they're not, they've got a lot of different options with the ball, even with their spinners. I know Gudakesh Modi has kind of fallen off a little bit, but Rakim Cornwall and Jamal Warrikan, they've got spin options as well. India's second spinners would be better because I suppose in that lineup you would be able to pick what? Akshar or Kuldeep, probably. So obviously India's second spinners would be stronger. But are India's second seamers as strong as the West Indies ones? So it's a bit of a tricky one. The batting is not an issue. They would certainly make more runs, or there'd be a better batting lineup. But would the West Indies players make more runs because they're going up against that one? So I don't know how to answer that. And I think sometimes you do get the situation, and we've seen this in associate cricket at times, of the teams sort of play better, right? And the other teams don't know how to take them seriously because they know that they're not a full strength team, if that makes, you see that a lot in sport. Lemon says, who's the most skilled bowler currently playing international cricket? Jasper Bumrah. Yeah, it's just Jasper Bumrah, isn't it? I think he can do more things at a higher level than anyone else. We don't really have a Philander, Muhammad Asif guy at the moment, do we? Jimmy's gone as well. Kemo Roach is quite skillful, but I wouldn't have him in the Jasper Bumrah camp. I don't think he has as many options as Jasper Bumrah, but he's very, very skillful. Yeah, I think that's where I would go. Ali says, as a fan, analyst, and broadcaster, how upset would you be if ODI cricket was converted into a format that allowed unlimited substitutes and 2 split innings, batting side changes after 25 overs, but continues to score from when they left off? ODI cricket is, as I think I've said before, it's probably my 4th kind of sport, my 4th favourite sport, and it's fine, but I prefer T20 cricket and Test cricket more. And pretty much I've preferred T20 cricket from the moment it existed more than ODI cricket. Pro 40 was my favourite, by the way. I did really like that. I think cricket needs substitutes anyway, Ali. So telling me that they have unlimited substitutions isn't really an issue for me. The 2 innings thing, I've said this before, it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work, and I'm talking about the way it is here, I think the Test 20 version is going to be slightly different because it looks like it's going to be 2 individual innings so that wickets don't carry over. But the 2 split innings thing doesn't work because Australia tried it and teams were blocking at the end of the first innings. Who the hell wants that? It's a terrible idea. Aravind says, I haven't heard of the Test 20 at all, and I honestly thought your video on it was a spoof or something, given how poorly thought out and amateurish the whole thing sounds. I was just explaining it to someone in cricket recently, and like I don't think they knew how bad it was, and I was taking them through it, and they were like, wait, what? Like there are so many other things I could have mentioned, Aravind, about that. Like the page where they have, I think it's the founders and the players, and like they just haven't had professional photos taken of the founders. Like, just get someone with a DSLR camera to just take a photo, please. But then it has some big names associated with it. Why would the likes of AB, ADOS, and Supercat risk their credibility by associating themselves with something that sounds like it was hatched in the midst of a drunken rave? It really, if you haven't seen the video or read the article, it's worth going through it because it is a truly bizarre situation. Money is the reason. My guess is, and I don't want to speak for these guys at all, they would have been offered, a bunch of money for not much time, and they would probably be getting a back end. So if it works, they would do that. I also think, and I'm assuming this probably means more for Hayden. I don't know where Harbijan's family are, but I would assume maybe not in that. And Clive Lloyd's would have grandchildren rather than children, but. Hayden's probably the only one with children that could take over one of the teams, but maybe that was also offered. That because it's the Nepo Baby League thing is there, and I suppose he's got a daughter who works in cricket or in media and cricket. So maybe there's something that was also offered to him, and maybe that was offered to the other guys as well. But he's the one that kind of makes the most sense with that. So yes, that's what it is. It's money. I mean, you go through it. Well, I worked for a website once called Crick Dude. And the guy from Crick Dude still never paid me, by the way. And he wanted to, and he had really good intention of what he wanted it to be. I think he'd been educated in America. And he's like, I'm in America, I'm watching all this stuff. And like, these people are like writing about sport at a level that cricket isn't. And I was like, yeah, I agree. And he's like, come over. And like, I think I think it was during an IPL, maybe I had to write 2 columns a week or something. And, I wrote, there's probably the first time I did anything analytical. It wasn't analytics from the point of view of I do it now, but it was a lot more, looking at fit of players and, role definition, all that sort of stuff that I cover now. But this was like in 2008 or 2009. And I remember at the time him saying to me, we've got Sachin Tendulkar involved. And I don't know how much he paid Sachin Tendulkar, but I'm assuming it was 6 figures. And what they did was Sachin Tendulkar came into a laptop and they like filmed him pressing the button to make the website live. Like, and this was, I don't know if anyone will ever go back and say, oh, Sachin Tendulkar was involved in this terrible website that didn't pay people, right? Like, quite often these things just happen and they disappear and those players take the money. I do think that, they should be a little bit, maybe not more careful, but no, I do think they should be more careful. I think a lot of players take money for things that just doesn't make any sense. Rob says, why do wicket keepers still wear shin pads? I don't think I've ever seen a keeper hit on the shin. Rob, please go back and watch all of MS doing this career, if you could. Happens a lot with slow balls, Rob. A lot with slow balls and when wickets are inconsistent with bounce. So I don't know how you haven't seen it. The reason is you would break your leg. The reason that cricket pads exist for batters and keepers is because people were breaking their legs. And we bowl a lot faster now. If that ball hits you on the wrong angle, you have a real chance of doing that. And you might get hit multiple times. I think shin pads makes more sense than the traditional wicket-keeping pads. Although, as someone who, I don't even know if I can wicket-keep anymore with my knees, but as someone who did do wicket-keeping probably, 2 or 3 times a year for, 10 or 15 years, I don't know if I would feel comfortable doing shin pads just because the wicket-keeping pads were part of the whole thing. I was never particularly good at using my pads, but certainly the ball hit them on occasion. But yeah, you definitely need shin pads. But yeah, wicket keeping pads, I think you make a pretty solid argument that they don't make as much sense. I wonder, is it catchers or shortstops where they have the sort of the hard shin pad and then a thing that comes over the knee that's a bit more flexible? I think there's something in baseball anyway. Something like that would make sense. You want to have as much versatility and movement as possible, but also make sure you don't break your leg. PJ says, why does Cricket Phone not have any player match impact ratings for test matches, considering they already do it for T20s? Surely they can just tweak a formula or two, or is it a lot more nuanced than that? Or is Cricket Info just given up on being a useful website ever again? No, it's a much harder. We don't have a lot of advanced numbers for test matches, right? And it's for that very reason. T20 and one-day cricket have formulas, right? It's very hard to have an open-end formula for test cricket. So it is very difficult. There are ways of doing it, and we're certainly moving towards that. But because you get these sort of extremes, like, I don't know, Michael Clark comes in and the score's, 15 for 3, and he makes 300 on an impacts index. I don't know how that would work. Whereas in actual fact, what we know what happened is Michael Clark probably survived about 5-6 difficult overs. And then the pitch flattened out. And we know it was pretty flat for the rest of that game, right? So not having a go at Michael Clark, but it's just tougher to work these things out. I know, was it the old Holding Willie impact index in the day? That was always a bit flawed, but a good like an early attempt at trying to do this. But yeah, we don't have them either. So I'm not going to have a go at Crick Info for not having them. I know the way that we've thought about this as a company is we really want to get test and T20 stats right. Even come up with, what we're trying to do at the moment is, if myself, Robbie, and Deepak get funding, one of the things that we'll be running will be a proper advanced analytics website. But that is going to be starting with T20 cricket and one-day cricket because we have the numbers already. Test cricket's a lot harder. I think I've said this before, but when Cricket Australia hired like a bunch of these tech companies and data companies to come in and try and fit, give them numbers on Test cricket, they nicknamed Test cricket the monster. It's really hard. It's way harder. T20 cricket, I basically worked out 3 or 4 metrics on my own in the first week that could help. Like, I didn't even know. I'm not even sure I knew what the word metric meant beforehand. It really isn't that hard. Whereas Test cricket is a lot harder. Ajit says, why is the IPL playoff system considered the fairest? Why should a team get a second chance because they were great in the league but aren't able to deliver in a knockout? By that logic, India should have gotten a second chance after the semi-final in 2019. Yeah, they should have, Ajit. Right? If you finish first and the other team finished fourth and you've won 4 or 5 extra games in some cases, why should you have the same percentage chance of going through to the next round? It doesn't make any sense, right? At the very least, if you wanted to change it around, you should be having home games, right, for those semifinals. So why is it considered the fairest? Because those teams have been the best teams throughout the year, and they get a double bite at the cherry, right? If you don't have a good record all the way through that year, then you have to win 3 games in a row, right? That's a much fairer system than saying one team wins 11 games and another team wins 6.5 or 7 games, and they both end up with the same percentage chance of going through. It doesn't make any sense. There was a year a while back in the Big Bash when I worked for Melbourne Stars. We finished 4th, and I think we were starting to assemble a fairly decent team. And I think the next year they might have finished 2nd, right? But we finished 4th. Partly because there was a blackout of one of the Big Bash games and that the points were shared. And if, I think it was the home team, I think it was Brisbane, had got their points, Melbourne Stars wouldn't have made the finals. Now, Melbourne Stars then played a blinder in the semi-final and were ahead for like 75% of the final, right? And so they almost won based on the lights going out at a venue, which had nothing to do with the Big Bash team involved. One good game, right? And then a very good matchup where they matched up really well against another opposition. That's not what you should be winning for, right? You should be winning for sustained excellence. And so if you're good enough to dominate the league, you should be getting a second chance. That's what's fair, right? And so I would argue that the 2019 World Cup and a lot of these different things, we shouldn't be having World Cup finals in a one-off game, right? Like I don't really understand that. It should be best of 3. Especially in cricket where a toss or a catch or a decision can kind of, completely change everything. I think the old Kerry Packer method, which was 1,000 years ago, makes a lot more sense. I think if you have a best of 3 final, then you probably wouldn't need this situation Ajit that we have at the moment. I don't know why the IPL doesn't have a best of 3 finals anyway. Why would you not want 2 or 3 games in your finals for extra viewing? I still like the idea of having the second chance for the teams who dominated in the league. But yeah, you shouldn't have to. I think it should be slight. If you haven't won a lot of games through the year, and then you win your way through. Like if you look at the best sports in the world, the more mature leagues. So obviously basketball is one that I know very well. It's very rare that a team outside the top 3 wins, right? And that's because they are the best teams over a long distance, but also they can get upset in the first game and they still have 6 more games in that series to be able to come back, and they have home court advantage, right? That's a much fairer system than a knockout system like what they do in college basketball, right? There's still something cool about knockout. And so, like, I actually don't mind the World Cup being knockout because I think that, World Cup football, World Cup cricket makes sense, World Cup basketball. But if you're having a league, right, and it's over a long period of time where we have showed the dominance of one side, it's a bit weird to me to not give them an advantage for having that dominance. That's a blank question. Karen says, your deep dives into cricket history, like the brilliant monologue on Vinny Mankad, are a rare gift. It would be fascinating to see if you revisit the legacy of India's 3 VJs, Merchant, Hazar, and Mandraker. P.S. VJ Merchant, sometimes referred to as the Bradman of the East, is still considered to be a founder of the Bombay School of batsmanship and also quite an impressive radio commentator. I didn't know about the radio commentary. Yeah, I think I said recently, someone was asking me like what some of my blank spots were or my flat spots were in history. And I think the VJs are firmly kind of in the middle of that. For the book, I did do a little bit more research on it. Neither of VJ Merchant or Hazard. Oh, I'll just say Merchant or Hazard. I don't need to say their first names. We know they're all VJs. Actually, all 3 of them are mentioned in the book. So Vijay Mandraker is mentioned early on. Merchant and Hazard are mentioned later on. So they don't make the list, partly because they didn't play enough tests. And I kind of felt like if Barry Richards wasn't going to be in it, it's a bit up in the air. They weren't far off. Like there was times when certainly one of them was in the list. Now I can't remember who. But I know a lot about Vinny Mankad, partly because, just fascinated by him as a cricketer. I don't know as much on the other guys. We will obviously, it's the kind of thing that we do. We don't. So someone sent me a message the other day going, who's the player? Oh, no, Nominali. Someone was like, Nominali's done incredible things in the last year. You need to do a piece on him. There are sometimes when we do that. I'm trying to think of, I think we felt we hadn't done enough on Rabada and Cummins, so we wanted a topic that would bring them in. There's been a couple of other pieces similar times where we're like, oh, this person probably deserves a piece. Can we come up with it? But it's not how we come up with our ideas. The way we come up with our ideas is what stories do we want to tell? Like, is there something specific? So, Nat Silverbrunt was someone that, like, Cheyenne was, very much interested in as a player and wanted to tell a story about Nat Silverbrunt. Elise Perry was someone where I was like, I think people miss, because of the way she looks and the way her career's gone, I think people misunderstand how tough Elise Perry is. So I want to tell a story about how tough she is. So we lead more with the story than the person, right? So if you look at Jasprit Bumrah, we've done so many videos on Jasprit Bumrah, but it's not because I'm like, Jasprit Bumrah will get hits. It's not because I'm like, Jasprit Bumrah is a player that we need to cover. It's because when I watch Jasprit Bumrah bowl, something fires off in my brain, right? And so that's how we make our stories. So that doesn't mean that, Merchant, Hazard, Mandraker, many other older cricketers wouldn't have that. There's we've got a list of players that we would like to cover. Bob Appleyard is someone I really want to cover that we've never covered. properly. I think he was in the Mustafiz Rahman video briefly, but Bob Appleyard is certainly a cricketer who I think is worth talking about. We've covered Sid Barnes, but through the vision of Jasprit Bumrah. So there are older cricketers that we kind of want to cover a little bit more. I mean, this hand here is a particular cricketer that we haven't covered on the site so far, right? So there's no doubt that there is an element of that. But we're looking at the story. Like, I don't just want to be like, I want to cover old cricketer because I want to put them in context, or I want to look at a story that comes off them. We have so many unmade videos at any one time. But yeah, eventually we would love to be able to do that. And also we're in a position at the moment where if we do manage to get funding for this, that sort of stage 2 kind of idea, that's what I want to be able to do is, hire people like, Arun Singh Gupta and Abhishek Mukherjee and the old e-ball blog, Giles, I forgot his last name, but people like that, to bring them in with maybe even more modern day writers, and partner up and just be like, how do we make the story that is going to be the best story, but we can also, do justice to this person. At the moment, we're only one person, and I've had COVID or the flu in the last week, and so we're probably not going to do as many videos this week as because I've been backed up a little bit. So that's where we are. And I have a look here. I've got 2 pieces here that are really, really interesting. They're not really. Well, one of them's kind of about Joe Root and Virat Kohli, and the other ones are kind of about the Australian team. But they're more interesting things that come to our mind, and we got tons of those. I've done a whole feature on part-time bowlers that hasn't come out yet. Shine's done the Most Improved Player Award, which we haven't got out yet. I've got another big feature on West Indies cricket that needs to be out. We've got a couple of, because I got the flu, we've got maybe 1 or 2 women's pieces that haven't come out as well. Like, there's always something to be told, and that's never going to stop. And that's why this channel will always be around, right? Because it has so many options. Josh says, Kane Williamson was ranked 32 in the art of batting. Available now. An excellent player, somewhat held back for being a home track bully. It's more, I wouldn't say he was held back for being a home track bully. I would say the biggest thing that held him back was the fact that he hadn't made runs against the best attacks. And I think Barrington was another player that, like, we looked at his record, we looked at who he went up against at times, and we were like, maybe he just didn't face that many good attacks. So we were unsure with him. Whereas in Kane Williamson's case, we're like, well, we know when he faced good attacks. He never made runs in South Africa. He's been really bad against India and Australia and England as well. So that was the issue. Imagine he finds the form of his life, averaging 70 across 17 further tests, become the batter with the highest average in the 10K club. He's been averaging 64.37 since 2020, which will likely fall off after series away versus England and Australia and home versus India. Okay. So here's the thing for me. I don't care if he ends up with the highest batting average of players over 10K runs if he can't do it against those sides that you mentioned. At a certain point, Josh, if we say he's the best player of mediocre bowling, or one of the best players of mediocre bowling ever, and I think you make that claim with Kane Williamson, I think that's absolutely fine. But until he can consistently make runs against the best attacks, there is a massive question mark over his overall quality, right? Now, it's still good enough to make him the 32nd best batter of all time. I think if he went on an absolute tear against those 3 teams, I think you can make a fairly clear argument. You'd be like, look, he didn't do it for his whole career, but he did show us he could do it. And that's maybe enough for us to bump him up a few spots. But in order for him to go from 32 till, above Virat and AB de Villiers, where are they, around the 23, 24 period, he'd probably have to play for another 4 years and do a couple of those teams twice, right? And away. Specifically, he would need to do it twice and away. If he did that, if he conquered South Africa on a tour there, if he made runs home and away versus who's got the better attack, India or Australia, right? One of those. And if he made runs against the other one and then England, I'd be willing to be like, okay, there's something here, right? Like that means he should move up some spots. But he has to do that. And he hasn't so far, right? And that doesn't mean he won't for the rest of his career, but he has to do that. Hurt says, taking inspiration from the 100, could the ICC explore hosting the Women's T20 World Cup alongside the men's event? They've done it about 5 times. While a number of teams and logistics require adjustment, would running both together amplify the women's game through shared visibility? So the problem is, there's many different issues here. The first one that I covered was the 2012 edition, and they were run together. The women were in Gaul, and the men were in Kandy and Colombo. Where do you think the cricket media was? Right? And I remember me and Sam Collins were desperate to get down. We couldn't find a day when we could get there and back. So in those days, I think it was before the freeway had been created, it was about a day and a half to get there and back, right? And cover the game and do it properly. We didn't have that, whereas we could get to, I think we only went to Kandy once. We basically just stayed in Colombo during that tournament. And we went in the morning of Kandy, but we didn't have a day when we weren't covering something that Cricinfo needed us to cover in Colombo. The second problem is that if you've got the women, I remember covering a Big Bash game once, women's Big Bash game and men's Big Bash game. It's Melbourne Stars at the MCG. And the game was tied and there needed to be a super over. But because the men's game had to start on time, the women had to run from one side of the ground to the other because their bags had all been taken away, right? Because they were getting ready for the next game. And now it was a tie. They had to get their bags back, run around, and then come out and play in a super over. And the women have told me many times of situations where they've been rushed or pushed aside or everything. And the men often don't like it either because they don't have the ability to go out and do their warm-ups on the ground. So that's a problem. Eventually, though, the women's cricket is just going to have to survive on its own. And to be fair, before the rain in this World Cup, it was doing really, really well. The last T20 World Cup, it was doing really, really well. This would be a step back for women's cricket now to do it in this way. But yeah, it has been done. I'm trying to think. 2009, 2000 and I can't remember 2010, but 2009, 2012, 2016. Those are the ones that I have a direct relationship with. But I'd say there was at least 2 or 3 more in the middle of all that as well. Lemon says, how much do you rate Ryan Harris as a bowler? Injuries obviously cut his career short, but he has outstanding numbers. Yeah, I think we talked about Ryan Harris when I was on the Stick to Cricket podcast. He's got a bowling average in the Ashes of like 20. You talk to people who played him, and I think KP said this about him recently. He was just a beast because he was fast, he was strong, so the ball really hit your bat. He was skillful. He just couldn't do it enough. Right? I've often compared him to Bruce Reid. I think actually Ryan Harris is a better bowler than Bruce Reid. But I remember at one stage, South Africans getting really upset when I think they had similar records, Ryan Harris and Vernon Philander. And me and George Rubell were asked on polite inquiries who was better. We're like Ryan Harris. And then we got like 10 questions about it the next time. And they were like, well, how can we be better? The records are almost identical. And I was like, yeah, but Ryan Harris can bounce you out. He can york you out. He can swing it. He can seam it. He's got so many extra skills. He really was one of the most complete bowlers of all time. And yet, at the age of 26, 27, he's 12th man for South Australia. People talk about his injuries. They don't talk about the fact that South Australia did not pick one of the most talented bowlers in the world. From the first time I saw him, I remember telling all my friends, I said, this guy's a test bowler. And they all looked him up. They went, he's 29, he's too old. I said, just watch him. Just watch him. I saw it in one Shield game. Honestly, I was like, how has this guy not played before? I don't understand it. He was the best bowler in Shield cricket by such a distance that year. And then he wasn't even offered a 2-year contract by South Australia the next year. Like, South Australia just completely misused one of the most talented cricketers I've ever seen. And on top of that is the injuries. He was not built to bowl consistently fast. He was too big. PJ says, burning one of my questions to publicly request Jessica to start asking Wagon Wheel questions again. We miss her cricket knowledge. Maybe get her name 3 times to slowly get her attention. Jessica! Has she not asked one in a while? She's probably been busy. Jessica is always busy, by the way. Oh, there we go. Ajit says, why... Oh, no, we've already done that one. That came up twice. We'll take another quick break here, and then after that, we'll get to any super chats or anything else that is available. We'll get to things. Quite often, we do get to things.
Cricket boards actually make watching their games almost impossible now. I spend almost as much time trying to find where I can view it as I do actually following the action. That is why I use NordVPN. They let me find all the cricket I want to watch while protecting me from the nasty side of the internet. Nord will free your cricket matches. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/good areas to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months on top. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Watch every match with NordVPN.
All right. Ninad, Joshi. I did that the other day with a guy when me and Robbie were on one. Will run milestones in an innings first created to build anticipation for the viewers in every session, or is the reason something else? So a lot of those things came from so you could give the players money. So a hat trick, right, is literally you would take the hat trick and they would take the hat around and people would give you money for doing it. So almost all of those early ones were so you could help support the players. Let's say it's Hambledon and you've got 10,000 people. Maybe people have bet on him and they've won some money or wasn't. And it's ridiculous that the bowlers don't do it. So I think there's a bit of class system in it as well. Well done, sir. But yeah, a lot of it was to do with money, about getting money to players. So if you go back and you read, so I think it's Charles Bannerman. Yeah, I think it was the first innings. If you go back and you have a look, so he makes that incredible 100 in the first Test match, and he's given money. Might have been given a watch or something as well. So players were paid a lot more performance based, even when they were professionals in those days, than they were anything else. And if you've got a crowd of 30 or 40,000 people there, and they're sticking around afterwards because it wasn't like the way that cricket is played today, they want to show their appreciation for these players. So a lot of those different sort of parts of cricket come from, wanting to do that and everything else. So I know even when I played club cricket in Melbourne, we used to, if you made a 50, you got paid like a certain amount of money. If you made 100, you got paid a certain amount of money. That was just part of playing cricket. Upbeat says, bought The Art of Batting. The Art of Batting. There we go. Available now. I think it's back on sale in India. It sold out briefly. I might be coming to India soon, so hold on to your hats. Binged it on the weekend. Thank you very much. Absolutely lovely read. Do you see Smith, Root climb up the list by the end of their careers? So Smith was probably going to be higher, and then I think you could make a case if he hadn't have had those, I don't know what it was, 3 years in the wilderness and opening the batting and everything else. If he hadn't have done that, I think you'd make a case for him being tacked onto the end of the top 3 players. Certainly he goes into that Hutton tier. Hutton, Lara, maybe. Well, actually, he's already in that tier, but he'd probably be at the front of that tier, right? I think you can make a claim that he's a better player than Hutton at that point. And he might still go on to be one. I don't think you can make a claim that Smith is going to go past Sachin, Bradman, or Hobbs. Longevity as much as anything. I don't think Smith's career is going to be that long. He made a comment the other day about his age and everything and how it's catching up to him. Maybe he get 3 or 4 more years, but the chances of him averaging 50, 55 for those 3 or 4 more years is pretty low, right? So even if he does make runs, he's more likely to make 45 to 50, which are still really good. And that might get him past Hutton and Lara, but I don't think that gets him into the top 3. Root can certainly climb up. I think Root probably went from 18 to 14 while writing the book. So what was that in a 2-year period, say? So he went up quite a few spots. I think he was just ahead of Ponting or just behind Ponting, and we moved him up quite a bit. Hard to get him into the top 10 at the moment, but if he plays 4 more years and he averages over 50 in 2 of them and over 40 in the other 2, I think the amount of runs, the longevity, and the fact he's still doing it in his late 30s probably pushes him into that Kumar Sangakkara kind of, and where Sangakkara is about 10, right? That sort of Sangakkara Callis. Remember, Sangakkara and Callis batted in very batting dominant eras. Root starts his career in a batting dominant era and then actually continues to dominate in a bowling dominant era. So I think the fact that his numbers are still absolutely ridiculous, I think does that. Again, it's not a very long career. if it becomes a very long career, that's when things change, because at that point it's very, very different. But yeah, that sort of, I think you can make a claim, I'd have to go into the book, but there's I don't know if it's a tier, but there's certainly a peer, a group in the book, which is Herbert Sutcliffe, Callis, and Sangakkara are all pretty close to each other, maybe 9, 10, 11, or 10, 11, 12. I think you can, even after a couple of years, Roots probably has to be put in that kind of an area. He probably has to make some runs on this tour of Australia to cement that. It's one of the reasons that Ponting's a little bit lower, how he went in India. At the end of the day, it's what we're just talking about with Williamson. One of the things we were looking at is how you were against the best teams or the best bowlers in the world. So I think all those things play a small part. How the list changed, they didn't change that much, because we kind of had a statistical list originally, where maybe guys like Gary Kirsten and Bob Simpson did a little bit better, and then we did a deep dive into both of them, and we're like, actually, we're not happy with it just being on our stats. I think Garfield Sobers was a bit lower than we wanted him to be as well. So we had to make some editorial decisions. We had to do deeper dives in certain situations on particular players. Like Kane Barrington was another one who was certainly a lot higher in some of our early lists. As far as the players go, I think Kane Williamson, maybe we put him up a spot or two higher towards the end. We wanted to be fair to him, but also not unfair to him, if that makes sense. I don't think Virat moved. The two that moved the most were Marnus Labuschagne and Babar Azam, who were both fringe top 50 players when we started the book, and now are nowhere near it. And then Smith probably moved. I reckon we had Smith at 4, ahead of Hutton and Lara. And I think, and I can't remember these. I should know the numbers, but I don't. Maybe I just write them on my blackboard so I can keep them available to me. But yeah, those were the only guys that really moved a lot. As I said, a lot of other players moved. And then I think we moved Viv Richards again towards the end, because we hadn't, the last thing that we factored in. So we did a statistical look, and we were like, okay, that gives us a good rough framework, but now we need to be a little bit more, we need to build cases for individual players. And then we looked at, and then we brought in different things. And the last thing I remember us bringing in was the strike rate. And so Viv was probably outside the top 10 until we did strike rate. And then when we factored that in, we were like, well, no one had been faster than him for like 100 years. And, there's that. So I think Viv, Hayden, Greenwich, Sehwag, KP probably all shifted up when we factored in strike rate or the ability to change games very, very quickly. Abe says, I know you rate De Villiers very highly, only because I have eyes. Did he have any glaring weaknesses when he was at the peak of his powers? No, he definitely, I think he had a slight technical issues. He talks about it in the interview I do with him, Abe, if you want to go have a look at it. So I think earlier he obviously didn't have the sort of the passion, the burning passion, the way that, say, someone like Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli did. And then he had a slight technical flaw. So he would even say that his batting was not always perfectly technically. So I think that always stayed with him, but he could overcome that. And then he also had a weakness against spin earlier on. I think the technical thing remained, but the thing is that when you are AB de Villiers and you can essentially say that Mitchell Johnson feels like he's bowling underarm, the technical deficiency doesn't matter as much at that point, right? I think you could get him in a sort of, I think earlier in his career, you could certainly get him sort of just working his way in, working his way out of games. So you could kind of just let him sort of float. I think once he gets to his peak, he's actually pretty good at just being like, no, I'm here to make runs and I'm going to make runs and this is how I'm going to make them. And I would say there's no massive weaknesses there. I can't remember anything else. I'm not sure if I've ever done a huge technical breakdown of him, but I don't think, even though he has technique, like he would say that his technique was not completely ideal. He was seeing the ball so much earlier than everyone else. I don't think that mattered as much. Gusher says, when do you think big streamers, Netflix, Amazon, Google, are going to start competing for the ICC, IPL, and other big broadcasting rights? I think they already have. Amazon already have some rights, and they've definitely been dipping around. Don't know if Netflix did, but I think Netflix definitely had a look. I don't think Google are as interested, but Netflix, Amazon, there's someone else I'm missing here, have definitely started to have. Oh, Disney. Disney are already involved as well, right, in their own ways, and have been for a while. So yeah, they're already starting to have a look at it. A lot of it depends on how your businesses track with like the subcontinent. Like, Geo probably don't make money from the cricket rights. Geo probably make their money from the fact that they can exploit their cricket rights to make money off the phones, and they probably make a lot of money off that, right? And so there's a lot of different companies that do that. You know, you look at the way that Channel 7 have cricket, right? Channel 7 have cricket so they can advertise all their other TV shows, and they do the exact same thing with tennis. They probably don't make a profit on cricket or tennis, right? They might, but I don't think it's like a massive profit. But overall, as a business, not having the cricket, which I think Channel 9 found, Channel 10 have found it, you know, talking about Australian models, is eventually does hurt you. So, you know, with Netflix, the big time that they should have got cricket was probably before they were streaming when they first came in. So 2015, that's when they bought Death of a Gentleman. So I'm pretty sure that's when Netflix made a big push in India, or started Netflix in India. I'm not sure which one it was. I know I was in the meetings, but it was 10 years ago, and I've forgotten what Netflix told us. But I know that was a pivotal year for them. If they were streaming at that stage, it would have made a lot of sense for them to come in and get cricket rights. Maybe it doesn't make as much sense now, right? The same with Amazon. I don't know where Amazon are with Flipkart and everything else. And there's another one now, isn't there, that's taking probably stuff away from Amazon and Flipkart. So maybe Amazon are like, well, actually, we have a decent foothold in India. If we get cricket rights, we can do this. So I think a lot of it depends on how you kind of bring all those different things together. Up it says the numbers and weights you use for the top 50 sound very interesting. Do you plan to publish them? So we mentioned them in the book for different players all the way through. Oh my God, I'd have to go through them all. But there was about 15 or 16 different metrics that we looked at. So we looked at the number of times a player averaged over 40 in a year, and we considered that a good year. And the number of times they averaged over 50 in a year, we considered that a great year. So a player like Gary Kirsten has almost no years over 50. I'm not even sure if he has one, but he has like 12 over 40 or something ridiculous. And Hashim Amla is the complete opposite, right? We looked at peak, you know, what players did in their peak. We looked at numbers of players against fast bowling for modern cricketers. We looked at players where we had ball by ball records for them versus pace versus spin. You know, we looked at the match ratios, era ratios, away ratios. I'm trying to think of what else. You know, just number of runs, year span. I could go on and on. I'm trying to think of some of the others. We looked at median scores, especially for a couple of key players. Yeah, and we kind of tried to build a case for that. You know, we weighted batters who opened the batting higher than we did batters who batted at number 6, right? There's only one genuine number 6 in our team, which would be Sobers. Sorry, in the 50. I think that's right. There's a couple other guys who batted 6, like, you know, Border and Steve Waugh. Chandrapal bat 6? Maybe not. Clive Lloyd might have batted 6 as well. So there's a couple of other players who batted 6, but, you know, not, you know, Garfield Sobers was probably a number 6. You know, so we weighted that on certain things. Then we looked at, you know, quality of bowlers. We looked at who the best bowling attacks were in their era, how they went against them, percentage of runs made home versus away. One thing that I really like to do is I think that people who are really good against fast bowling have a better reputation than people who are really good against spin. So we tried to weight that up in our heads. So, you know, I think there's a lot of people who are like, Sunil Gavaskar is not a better bat than Viv Richards. Viv Richards is the best player of fast bowling ever, but genuine fast bowling in Test cricket might be like 5% of the deliveries you face, whereas spin bowling is like 50% of the deliveries you face, right? So if you're good against spin bowling, or in the case of Sunil Gavaskar, if you average over 100 against spin bowling, then that's worth a lot more than being really good against Jeff Thompson, because there's only one Jeff Thompson, right? So, you know, all those sorts of things. So it's all in the book up it. We haven't put it down as mathematically as we could, and we will probably keep adding to it. We don't feel that like the art of batting is finished as a project. I know me and Andy Zoltzman want to do something on it. Me and Robbie want to do something on it. There are many just sort of other parts of the book that we'll probably look to make into projects going ahead. We're obviously looking into potentially doing the bowling book as well. But yeah, there's a chapter in the book about the kinds of methods that we came up with, and how we used them, and what players sort of fared well or not well against them. And then we went from there. The fast bowling cartel was a great watch. They ranked their best ODI paces ever. Didn't adjust stats by era though. Who would be your top? The fast bowling cartel. Who would be your top 5 from India and Australia? ODI paces. Oh, I don't know. Would be, I don't know. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. Bumrah, McGrath, just from India and Australia. Bumrah, McGrath. It's ODI, is it? So Lee, Kapil Dev. Who's the next best Australian seamer in one-day cricket? Stark, probably. Yeah, if it's just India or Australia. But like, yeah, I don't have that. But yeah, I think I know that Damien Fleming's really been looking at doing more of those sorts of things. I think it's a really good idea. But yeah, that's why Flem needs the advanced stats, and Flem would love that stuff. Definitely. Anurag says, what if Root scores multiple 90s and has a spectacular Ashes but doesn't score a ton? Does it make him not a great batter according to some Aussie greats? Okay, who gives a fuck? It's such a bullshit thing. As I've said before, Root averages more in Australia than Ricky Ponting does in India. So what? Ricky Ponting got 100, so he's better in India? No one fucking thinks that. It's so stupid. And also this whole Ashes centric stuff. I'm like, look, I think Root going up against the best bowling attack and not averaging over 35, like we were talking about for Williamson, it's a question, right? It's an issue that he has in his career that he needs to overcome. He's not been good. He's not been as good as he should be against Australia. There's absolutely no doubt of that in Joe Root's case. And they've been one of the best bowling attacks at that time. The fact that it's Ashes doesn't matter to me. But when Australians start telling me that Ricky Ponting's not great because he didn't average 30 in India, I'm more than happy for the same thing to be said against Root. If Root scored like 4 90s in this series, England are a very good chance of winning the series. And so it doesn't matter. 100 is it's just a made up milestone, as I said earlier in the podcast, so we can give people money. It's so nonsensical, right? There have been, one of the best innings I ever saw ever was AB de Villiers at Centurion, where he makes, I want to say 89. It's one of the best innings I have ever seen, just of a player just in complete control on a dodgy wicket against incredible bowling. I've seen so many shit hundreds. I'm going to throw Sam Robson under the bus here. But I remember Sam Robson playing against Sri Lanka, making 100 where I reckon he didn't score a run for 4 overs against, God, who was their bowler at the time? Nuwan Pradeep. Was it Nuwan Pradeep? No, I don't think I mean Nuwan Pradeep, do I? Trying to remember who it was. But like, he just couldn't score, right? Like, over and over again. No, it wasn't Nuwan Pradeep. It was someone better than Nuwan Pradeep. I've forgotten his name. But he just kept bowling incredibly, and Robson just kept missing. It was quite a flat wicket. Eventually got himself into a position, and he went on and made 100, right? Like, fine. And I've seen far worse hundreds. I mean, Richard Hadley made 100 he made 2 hundreds in Test cricket, Richard Hadley. And one of those hundreds was when the West Indies essentially gave up midway through the game, right? Like, what are we even talking about here? Of like the idea that 100, it doesn't mean all that much. Now you can make a bigger argument. I think would be that he still hasn't made enough runs. And as I said, I also agree with that. But this whole 100 thing is kind of just, I don't know, maybe it's made for clicks. Where are we here? Oh, it was Oranga. Was it Oranga? Now I am confused. No, it was New Pradeep. I think I was right the first time. Yeah, it was a flattish pitch. It wasn't doing all that much. Everyone in Sri Lanka's side got a start. Everyone in England's side got a start. Like you get in, and Sam Robson, being a sort of player, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. Gets in, makes his runs, and we know how flat a pitch it is because Angelo Matthews and Rangana Harath put on what 200 runs eventually in that game. So once you sort of got past that new ball, which Robson did, and I'm not saying it was a bad 100 by Robson. I'm just saying it was fine, but it wasn't particularly. It wasn't like that one of the toughest innings of all time. So do we say that Robson is better than a player who's come over and never made 100? Like Doug Walters. Did Doug Walters ever make 100 in England? Probably not. Let's have a look. Right. My guess is he never did because he averaged about 12. Yeah, he made 650. No one thinks that Doug Walters is not a better player than Sam Robson, right? They're both Australian, at least by a background, even if one played for England. But no one thinks that Doug Walters is isn't a better player than Sam Robson. So again, it's sort of nonsensical at a certain point. I think it matters. It's not the defining thing between Root being great or not great, right? You're allowed to have a problem with one particular team or in one particular area or however you want to look at those things, right? I think that's absolutely fine. And I also think it's a bit of an anomaly, right? If you look at Root, how many tests has he played versus Australia? So Root has played 34 games versus Australia, right? And he's got 400s in those games with 1850s and an average of 40. It's still a little low for a great player, right? But he averages 59 versus India, who's one of the other great teams he's had to go up against. He's averaged 46 versus South Africa. He's got 300s in India, 100 in South Africa. He has hundreds everywhere except for UAE, Bangladesh, which has only played 2 games, and Australia, right? Like, this is a very well-rounded player who against the other, what's he got against New Zealand? Sorry, they're the third best bowling attack. The other best bowling attack he's gone up against. He averages 50 in New Zealand with 300s as well, right? So he's gone up against the 4 incredible bowling attacks in their own countries, and he's done really well against 3 of them. And then weirdly against Australia, he averages 35.6, almost 36, right, with 950s. It's a poor record for someone of his quality, but it's also not like he's averaging 25 or 22, right? What's Ponting? Probably 26 or something, right? And so, at a certain point, you have to be like, he probably should have got 100. But if he got 100 and averaged 25, that would be worse. Anyway. Anyanit says, how good will Mohammad Nisar and Amar Singh? How would they rank against other Indian fast bowlers? Mohammad Nisar I know quite a bit about. I mean, Amar Singh, not as much. Mohammad Nisar, I think, was just a very, very fast bowler. There's a lot of that sort of era in the 1930s is kind of when you're getting, Constantine comes through, Larwood is coming through. There's quite a few sort of guys who are getting a little bit quicker, and I think Mohammad Nisar is one of them. I don't think he was particularly accurate, but I think he was pretty fast. And I think he would have, I think in a more professional setup, or if, like not in, like professional, obviously everything's amateur back then, but I mean, if it wasn't the 1930s, if he'd been doing the same thing in the 1940s, they'd probably keep him around a little bit longer. And he plays a little bit more, but my memory of, and I haven't looked at my notes on him for years, but my memory of him was that he was a pretty good fast bowler who just wasn't particularly accurate. And so there were some issues there. In first class cricket, he takes 396 wickets at 17. In Test cricket, he took 25 wickets at 28. I think that's probably the kind of bowler he was in Test cricket. I think he would have got milked a little bit. And I think because he was so fast in India when there were so few fast bowlers, I can imagine domestic cricket, people were just like, I don't want to face this. What are you doing? This doesn't make any sense. And you wouldn't have faced a lot of bowlers like him. Anyway, that's it for me on the wagon wheel. Thank you to Anit and Ariane and Upit and everyone else. Abe, who sent the super chats through. We'll be back again shortly. I think Kimappa will be up. Will probably be the next show. And we'll do some other stuff. And hopefully now that I've sat here for an hour without passing out, I can do some other videos on the main channel as well, because we've got plenty that we want to do, but we just haven't had a chance to finish them yet. But I'm Jarrod Kimber. This has been your Wagon.
This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now.